Welcome to History 4314, American History Through Film. I'm Stephen Mintz, and for the next 15 weeks, we're going to see how American film has shaped every aspect of our culture, shaped the way we view the world, the way we see ourselves, our own personal ideals, and the way we view others. Because movies are our cultural seismograph. Every shift in our culture is recorded by the movies. For more than a century, movies have engaged our deepest emotions. They've made us laugh, they've made us weep, they've made us cringe with terror and tremble with excitement. They've offered wit, suspense, romance, and terror. Highbrow critics may dismiss Hollywood films as no more than schlock, but we all know better than that. We all know that movies have given their audiences more pleasure than any other art form. Movies are our opera. And they have also taught us fundamental lessons. Lessons about intimacy, lessons about tenderness, about lust, about conflict, about guilt, about shame, about loyalty. Detroit may be the nation's auto factory, but Hollywood is the nation's dream factory. That is, just as Detroit manufactures cars, what Hollywood manufactures are our fantasies and our cultural myths. And they may seem less tangible than the steel products that Detroit produces, and yet I'd argue they have just as much impact on people's thinking and people's lives as any automobile. Hollywood has given us our most intensive, our most long-lasting, and yes, our most distorted view of our nation's past. It has exposed us to the lifestyles of the rich and famous that we all aspire to emulate. And films have exposed us to the underside of American life. In short, what the movies have done is they have formed our nation's self-image. They have provided unifying symbols in a society fragmented by race, ethnicity, religion, by region, by gender. So of all the products produced by American popular culture, none is as sharply etched in our collective imagination as the movies. And it doesn't even matter if you haven't seen particular movies. Movies are so embedded in our culture that you pick them up. That is, they're spoofs about movies all the time, whether it's on The Simpsons, or it's on commercials, or elsewhere. And so the images from movies we all instantly recognize. If we could have the overhead projector, please. Oh, I see you've moved things from the past. Who is this? Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow. Not many of you have probably ever seen a movie with Jean Harlow, and yet her name is instantly recognizable. Now, the next one is probably a bit more familiar. King Kong. And you didn't have to see Jessica Lange in King Kong to know about this. And who are these people? The Marx Brothers. I mean, again, these are our culture. This is what shapes our culture. These are the images that are indelibly etched into our imagination. Even if you've never seen the Gold Rush, you're familiar with Charlie Chaplin taking his shoelaces and eating them as if they were spaghetti. Even if you've never seen a 1930s gangster film, you're all familiar instantly with Jimmy Cagney taking his grapefruit and squeezing it on Mae Clark's face. Or you're all familiar somewhere in the back of your imagination with Paul Muni, one of the great actors of the 1930s, and I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, being asked how he lives, and he replies, I steal. Who are these people? Again, people instantly know about these figures. You know a lot more about these figures than virtually anything else in your life. If I were to press you, a lot of facts would spill from your imagination. No Hollywood press agent, publicity agent, could be happier than what you know. Or here. Next overhead. Who are they? Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. If you saw The Green Mile, you saw them return to the silver screen. Because in our collective memory, these images do not disappear. They do not fade. They do not yellow. They do not burn up just because they're on nitrite film. They are part of our collective memory. And what's remarkable about that, and something we're going to talk about a great deal in our course, is it doesn't matter what your race is, or your ethnicity, or your gender. It's not that Hollywood doesn't make certain presumptions about what all those factors are, but it gives everyone a common frame of reference for good or for ill. This is no doubt familiar. And this even more familiar. As we'll try to get this straight. Or these figures. Again, even those who've never seen Casablanca instantly respond to the images and can probably even repeat the lines, even if they get them a little bit wrong, like Woody Allen did in Play It Again, Sam, because they're part of our deep-seated imagination. We can see in the movies how ethnicity will play out. What was Rita Hayworth's ethnicity? No. Mexican-American. And who is this? Yes, exactly. Or this? Marilyn Monroe. Or this? Before he gained weight. All societies create cultures, and our deepest, most productive culture has been the movies. We can hear Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard belittling suggestions that she's no longer a big star. She says, it's the pictures that got small. Or Orson Welles as Citizen Kane, Humphrey Bogart as Rick in Casablanca. These are part of our collective memory. So my argument in our class is that movies can open windows into American culture and politics. Movies are a mixture of art and business and popular entertainment, and the movies can provide deep insights into our ideals, our fantasies, our fears, our preoccupations. And so the movies both are our culture, and they also record the changes in the larger society. Movies reflect the political culture in which they are made. Some express the status quo, and others subvert it. So the argument we're going to have in this class, that I'm going to try to convince you of over the next 15 weeks, is that all movies are message movies. They don't have to be the disease of the week movie on TV for movies to carry powerful messages. Now, I don't mean simple messages like who you should vote for president. It's not just documentaries that are message movies, but these messages are deeply encoded. And one of the things we're going to learn in our class is how to decode those messages. So all movies are part Rorschach blot, part op-ed piece. Films, by their very nature, tell as much about us as they tell about the people who made them. So let's begin our class and take a look at the movies and see what they can tell us about a shifting American culture. I'd recommend to you that if you want to predict the future, you should go to the movies. Movies have the pulse of the country in a way that nothing else does. If you wanted to know that Ronald Reagan was going to become president in 1980, all you had to do was go to the movies back in 1976 and see what kind of movies people were watching. Movies like Rocky, celebrations of traditional American values. And you would have known that the culture's values were shifting, that the 1960s were long gone, and that the country's whole mood had changed. Movies are much more than mass entertainment. Movies, even crummy movies, are important sociological and cultural documents if you know how to read them. Movies, however, don't simply record and reflect values. Movies, as we all know, shape values. Much that we fantasize about, much that we aspire to, was shaped at the movie theater. And so my overarching argument for the next 15 weeks is this: movies have been the single most powerful force for social, cultural, and political change in America for 1 century. Now, the era of the movies may be over, supplanted now by new forms of electronic communication, but we'll see. Movies survived television, they survived radio, they may well survive the internet as well. So what the movies are educators, not like me, far more entertaining than me. Movies have been tutors and teachers to a shifting American culture. So let me briefly summarize some of the points that I'm going to be making to you over the weeks ahead. Before 1930, before the Great Depression, the era of sound movies, the film was an important modernizing force in American life. Movies, as much as anything else in American society, helped Americans shift from Victorian values to modern values. Now, we'll talk more in our course about what Victorian values were, but these were a set of values emphasizing self-control, personal repression, sexual prudery, and the like. And the movies were instrumental in shifting Americans away from that set of values to a distinctively modern set of values, a set of values that we still enjoy even today. Then, in Hollywood's golden age, between 1930 and 1960, film played a very, very different role. What film did is it forged a national consensus. That is, the movies helped create a shared conception of American history, a shared vision of America's role in the world, shared ideals of masculinity and femininity. For 30 years, Hollywood educated Americans about what it meant to be an American, and I would argue extremely successfully. Especially during the Great Depression, especially during World War II, Hollywood was instrumental in creating, sustaining, perpetuating a consensus of values in American society. And then, after 1960, Hollywood's role shifted again. Instead of making movies designed to appeal to a vast, uniform, homogeneous audience, Hollywood began to produce movies targeted at narrower segments of the population. And so instead of unifying the population, Hollywood helped to fragment the society. What Hollywood began to do in the 1960s, and of course this continues to today, is to offer films far more critical of conventional values. Now, ours is a course in American film, but it's not a course in all American film. It's not a course in documentary film. It's not a course in the avant-garde. It is a course in feature films. That is, it's a course that will focus on the handful of films that are lodged in our collective imagination. The movies whose stories, characters, and images we all know or should know. So even those who've never seen The Treasure of the Sierra Madre or Citizen Kane all respond instantly when you see parodies of them or retakes of them that permeate our culture. These images are like letters in the alphabet. They can be instantly drawn upon to stimulate a response in you. These films are key cultural artifacts. They are as much the symbols of our culture as anything is. And what we're going to do today is we're going to learn how to interpret visual imagery. And we're going to talk a bit about why that's important. I can take my sons to the movies, and the movies go in one eye, and they come out the other eye. You ask them what happened, and it's hard to get a straight answer. And you ask them why they liked it, and again, it's awfully hard to get a clear answer. But by the time we're done with this class, 15 weeks, you are going to be a film critic. You are going to be able to do something better, I hope, than many film critics can do. And that is, you're going to be able to interpret the movies as social and cultural documents. You're going to be able to tell me their true meaning. You're going to be able to tell me about the deep fears, trepidations, fantasies, aspirations that movies tap into. And you are going to be able to show the psychological, cultural, historical meaning of the films that people respond to. Now, this is not a course in film appreciation. If you want a course in film appreciation, you'll go to the School of Communications. This is not a course in film technique. If you want to study technique, you will go to USC or UCLA or NYU. My goal is a very different one. We're not going to focus on camera work or lighting or on set design. Technique is important, but from our perspective, technique is important because it's how people convey messages. We want to know how a movie successfully achieves its effects, and technique's part of that. But we're more interested in cultural interpretation. If you want to study technique, you might as well watch commercials. Commercials are far more sophisticated in terms of technique than most movies. Indeed, in America, most technique is simply technology. Whatever technology dominates the time, that's the technique that most American filmmakers use. If you want sophisticated technique, you see foreign films, not Hollywood films. American films do not have, in general, a high level of technological sophistication. What they do have is wit, imagination, skillful performers, and a fresh subject matter. That's why we go to the movies. That's why throughout most of the 20th century, most American entertainment dollars have been spent at the movies. Especially in the studio era, the period from 1930 to 1960, most Hollywood films looked like the studios that produced them. There was a Warner Brothers look. There was an MGM look. The movies looked alike because of the people who made them. They looked alike because of studio policies, the kind of materials that the studio executives bought, the way the films were written, the way they were directed, the way they were photographed. You can tell, and you'll see that over the course of the next 15 weeks. So again, we're not going to be looking at documentaries. We're not going to be looking at quote-unquote realistic films. We're going to look at the blockbusters that have attracted millions of Americans to the movies. So we're going to look at the movies people enjoyed, the movies that people responded to, not the films that were supposed to be good for us. Okay. When we go to the movies, it's not because we want to gain truth with a capital T. It's not because we want to be educated. It's because we want to expose ourselves to something that surprises us, to something that strikes us as funny or amazing or beautiful or terrifying. In other words, we go to the movies to expand our emotional world. But movies do more than that. It's not exactly the same thing as going to a gladiator match or even going to a circus, because all movies also educate us. Some would use a very different and less positive word. They would say indoctrinate us. In other words, movies send subtle messages to us, and many of these messages are subtly subversive. Now, what do I mean by subversive? I mean simply this. The movies send messages that challenge the official values taught in school, in churches, and in middle-class families. In the movies, we get low life, we get high life, we get fantasy, we get wish. But we don't get culture with a capital C. Movies are not supposed to be good for us. They're supposed to grab our emotions. They're supposed to tap our deepest feelings. And this was true even from the very beginning, almost exactly 100 years ago. Because of their cheap admission prices, the movies took their impetus not from high culture, but from all that was low and lewd. From the peep show, from burlesque, from the Wild West show, from vaudeville, from the comic strip. These were the inspirations for the early filmmakers. Movies were inspired by what was common and what was popular. We'll see some clips from early comedies, and we're going to see that they're filled with bathroom jokes and drunkenness and hatred for work and disdain for social proprieties. They're not a schoolmarm's definition of classy art. There's something very different. In this class, we're going to treat movies the same way that an archaeologist treats garbage. That is, we're going to treat movies as if they are cultural artifacts that we can interpret, that we can tease out meanings and see what they can tell us about people's deepest values, attitudes, hopes, and fears. Movies are among the most omnipresent of all artifacts around us, and yet most of us simply evade their real meaning. We don't see what's really before our eyes. And especially in today's class, we're going to take a look at how we can interpret visual materials as documents. That makes it sound very arcane. It's a lot more fun than that. Films reflect social values, as I said. They also shape them. Our manners, our ideas about sexuality, our language, our notions of style, all have been shaped by the movies. Now, if you were to speak with a psychoanalyst and you asked the psychoanalyst what patients speak about, you discover that often patients speak about the movies, because movies don't just seem like entertainment to them. They seem like real dramatizations of their lives. They're not just entertainment. Movies give visual presence to our hang-ups, our repressions, our fantasies, and the like. So even bad movies are valuable, I'll argue to you, as sociological and psychological documents. People literally identify with Julia Roberts or Jim Carrey. It's not just a movie, it's a soap opera of our lives. Now, two topics that are going to arise again in our class are ethnicity and social class. Ethnicity and class are the dirty little secrets of American life. And, for the most part, they're a dirty little secret in the movies. If you go to the movies, you would never get a real sense of how racially and ethnically diverse our society is, and you wouldn't come up with a very clear understanding of the meaning of social class either. Movies have played a very important role in teaching Americans that they live in a classless society, a classless society that's not riven by deep-seated racial or ethnic tensions. And that is, of course, a distortion. Read through Time magazine or watch network TV, and you'll assume that class and ethnicity are unimportant in America. Watch the show Friends, and I guess all friends basically look alike, right? But if you walk downtown in Houston, go up to the Petroleum Club, and they turn you away, you'll understand that class is something real in America. So think for a moment about the great American directors of our time. Scorsese, De Palma, Coppola, each one Italian Catholic. George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Martin Ritt, Sidney Pollack, all Jews who descended from Central or Eastern Europe. There has always been an important ethnic dimension to the movies. And it's no accident that the creators of Hollywood were outsiders. They were not WASPs. They did not come from the mainline Protestant elite. They were Southerners, like D.W. Griffith. They were lower-class Englishmen, like Charlie Chaplin, Cary Grant. They were Jews, Germans, Italians, Southerners, but they weren't from what we usually think of as the core of our culture. And yet, as I suggested before, these people who are themselves of ethnic descent have projected a very distorted image of ethnicity on the screen. Just because you're ethnic doesn't mean then that you celebrate ethnicity and that you try to emphasize that in your films. So there has always been an ethnic and class dimension to the movies, but it's difficult to disentangle. From the beginning, movies appealed first and foremost to the poor, to the young, to the immigrant. These were the mass audiences for movies from the very start, the beginning of the 20th century. People who would never dream of going to the opera or the symphony or the ballet would go to the movies, and it wasn't just because movies were cheap. They went to the movies because the movies celebrated their emotions, their values, their aspirations. And, not surprisingly, this frequently provoked backlashes. Again and again in American history, there have been harsh reactions against the kinds of films that Hollywood has made. Middle-class people have gotten hot and bothered again and again in American history about the kinds of movies that the mass audience has responded to. And so part of our class will deal with censorship and the recurrent and ongoing efforts to control and restrain the movies. Now, movies reveal the bad side about ethnicity as well as occasionally the good side. And what I mean by that is that the movies are filled with bigotry, ethnic and racial slurs, caricatures, and ethnic stereotypes. Movies operate through a kind of visual shorthand. You don't have to spell everything out, but that makes Hollywood extremely prone to ethnic, gender, racial caricature. There is something in the movies that we will look at and we will talk about that is certain to insult you and certain to appall you. The movies we are going to discuss in our class are saturated with racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, violence, and paternalistic condescension. If you want a graphic record of America's prejudices, you can go to the movies and see that too. I wish I could delete some of the scenes that you will see. I wish I too could censor some of the jokes you are going to hear. They're going to make you cringe, and even worse, they are going to insult you personally. I can swear that during the course of our class, each and every one of you will be insulted. And yet, there's nothing that I will do about that. We can't whitewash the past, nor should we want to. Historical reality shouldn't be censored. We need to see things as they are, not through fantasies, not through rose-colored glasses. And so we're going to spend some time in our class looking at how Hollywood constructed race in America, how Hollywood constructed ethnic stereotypes, how Hollywood constructed gender roles. This, too, is part of our story. And maybe this is for the good. Because if we can begin to understand the nature of prejudice, if we can begin to understand the way that stereotypes and caricatures are constructed and disseminated by mass media, then maybe we have the power to change them. But we certainly have no power if we just evade them or deny them. Now, this is an instructional television course, and copyright laws severely restrict the clips and images that you will see. Though I can assure you, I will test the boundaries of academic fair use. But we will see some clips and some images, and indeed, one of the goals of this class is to teach you how to read the movies, how to read visual imagery. And so what we're going to do next is talk a bit about how to decode visual images. And we're going to start out by talking about crime shows, a form of entertainment that I'm sure you're as familiar with as I am. And my point is this: even the most mundane crime show, even the most mundane situation comedy carries messages about how our society works and how it might work better. You don't need to have a docudrama in order to send people messages about their society. So let me illustrate this. I'm going to talk about some recent TV shows about crime and see what hidden messages, what encoded messages they send. Cops and robbers, These are a staple of television from the very beginning. And they're often treated as an innocuous form of popular entertainment, that is, except when people criticize the violence on them. But the point I want to make to you is that these cops and robbers shows carry a great deal of ideological baggage. So let's see how TV treats crime and law enforcement. Okay, the first point that I would make to you is that criminals are overwhelmingly upper middle class or upper class males over the age of 30. If you do a statistical analysis of TV shows, you will see that this is overwhelmingly the case. Rich characters are more than twice as likely as poor characters to commit crimes. They're twice as likely even as middle-class characters to commit crime. So why, I might ask you, do rich people commit crimes on TV? Press down on your button if you have the answer to this question. Why would rich people commit the crimes on television? Well, there must be a reason. Yes?
I think it's because the mass audience is usually, let's say, lower middle class or middle class, and they don't like rich people because they have all the money, so they want them to be
I think
bad.
you're onto something. Let's take a look. It's an insatiable desire for more wealth. That's what motivates these characters on television. If you look at what motivates crime on TV, the answer is greed, pure greed. 75% of all the crimes committed on television, outside of newscasts, is committed simply to get more money. Typical of these crimes are businessmen whose selfish pursuit of profit pushes them into illegal activities. There is the head of a multinational who murders his competitor. There is the owner of a chemical company who dumps toxic waste and commits murder to cover up his crime. There's a bank manager who robs his own bank. There's a stockbroker who runs a prostitution ring. There's an executive who peddles classified equipment to an unfriendly country. These are the kinds of crimes that television likes best. Indeed, on TV, a substantial portion of all businessmen are actually criminals. Indeed, apart from professional gangsters, businessmen are the single largest group of criminals on TV. This is interesting. Yes. Please press your button. There's a button there. Yes. Thank you. No, you have to hold it when you speak.
There's also, I think, now I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so I speak from my own agenda, but a kind of anti-agenda. The news on television tells us that all of the crime is committed by those other people, poor, ethnically different, quote unquote, racially different. And there may be some hidden agenda there that we're afraid of the wrong people.
Well, let's look a little further. You may be onto something, I think. TV businessmen account for 1 in 4 lawbreakers. Businessmen, however, are not the only bad guys. Establishment figures of all sort are treated as wrongdoers on television. On TV, it's the pillar of the community who is most likely to perpetrate evil. There's doctors who run counterfeiting rings, lawyers with a sideline in pornography, traffic cops who take bribes, drug-dealing police captains, lieutenants who steal hot diamonds. These are the kinds of crime one sees on cops and robbers shows. All told, 1 criminal in every 8 on television is a police officer. Now, of course, you'll say that isn't this the very inverse of what we read in the newspaper? Generally on TV, there are no juvenile delinquents and no youth gangs. It's a very different view of crime. But you might ask, aren't police also portrayed as the good guys? And aren't some businessmen portrayed as good? You might remember the old TV show, Heart to Heart, right? Well, of law enforcers, 54% function as good guys, and 28%, more than a quarter, function as bad guys. Few, however, are portrayed as heroes. Who then is glamorous? Well, private investigators, for one thing. Over 90% of private eyes are good guys, unlike the police, remember. Only 1 out of every 5 crimes on TV is ever solved by the police, but 2 out of 3 are solved by private eyes. Why? What's going on here? Cat got your tongue? Any thoughts? Yes, please. And please push the button.
Sherlock Holmes was a private investigator as well. And it's perhaps a retaliation against established authority. And a lashback against incompetence, which we see every day.
No, I think you're again, very much onto something. What TV tells us is that outside help or unorthodox means are needed to enforce the law. Law enforcers who bend the rules or even break them are more than twice as likely to solve a crime on television as those who go by the book. In other words, these crime shows are filled with lessons, or as I would put it, ideological messages. There's nothing wrong with that. Everything's loaded with messages. Our job is to decipher them, to decode those messages. Private citizens are even more effective at solving crime on TV than our private eyes. Good old boys fighting the system like modern Robin Hoods. You all remember the Dukes of Hazzard. That theme pervades television crime shows. That if you work outside the system, you're much more likely to solve the problem. And so the fundamental, underlying ideological message that television sends is it upholds law and order without glorifying the law enforcement establishment. TV and the movies are laced with anti-establishment and anti-authority themes. So they're pro-law without being pro-authority. Okay. Now, what I would like to suggest to you is that that does not simply reflect the ideology of a group of liberal Hollywood screenwriters working on their power books while sitting on the beach in Malibu. Rather, what I would try to suggest to you is that those themes reflect what the audience believes and what the audience is interested in. If you look at Gallup polls and other opinion polls, you'll see the same kind of themes running through public opinion. It's not that people are being indoctrinated. They're seeing what they want to see. And the screenwriters are reflecting the audience's tastes, the audience's predilections, the audience's fantasies. We may admire a Bill Gates. We may wish to be just like Bill Gates. But there's a side of Americans that loves to see rich people get their comeuppance too. And Hollywood, which knows a lot about wealth, is also able to play it both ways. The average American believes that businessmen have too much power, that public officials don't care about the average citizen. Most Americans reject the notion that those in authority know best. And so on television we have a fantasy world where our values are played out. A world of well-heeled criminals and crime busters who bypass the law enforcement establishment. So crime shows don't tell you much about crime in America. They're certainly not documentaries, even if they call themselves real-life criminal shows. They say more about us than they do about crime. Okay, we started out with a crime show. Next, we're going to look at a soap commercial. And what could be more innocuous than a soap commercial? How could a soap commercial be laden with ideological messages? Well, we're going to see. And we're going to see that nothing is more laden with ideological messages than a soap commercial. What we're going to see is that under close reading, this ad reveals kinky sex, corrosive guilt, and devastatingly hilarious social satire. We're going to talk about a commercial for a soap called Shield, an anti-odor soap, a deodorant soap. I wish I could play it for you because it would only take 30 seconds. And yet, this 30 seconds tells more about American society than almost anything I could show you. The commercial begins with a camera looking at a house's first floor window. And in the window we see a young man, apparently naked and half crazed with anxiety. "Gail," he screams through the open window, "the most important shower of my life, and you switch deodorant soap." He is, we now see, only half naked. He's wearing a towel around his waist, and he's shaking a bar of soap. Gail, in contrast, is standing in the garden outside the window. She wears a carefully tailored shirt and is standing clipping a hedge. She handles her husband's comments with an ease that suggests years of contempt. "Shield is better," she says in her most patronizing voice. "It's extra strength." "Yeah," whimpers the man, "but my first call is on J.J. Hist, the company's toughest customer, and now this." Gail nods with mock sympathy, but stands firm. "Shield fights odor better, so you'll feel cleaner," she assures her husband. Then she rolls her eyes heavenward as if to say, "What an idiot." No longer frantic, the man now takes his shower, apparently delighted with Shield. A baritone voice now proclaims, "Clinical tests prove Shield fights odor better than the leading deodorant soap." A bar of Shield and a bar of the other soap zip on the screen, forming a graph which demonstrates that Shield does fight odor better, so you'll feel cleaner. The man now reappears, and he's completely transformed. He's calm, he's dressed up, his voice is now deep and resonant. "I do feel cleaner," he announces cheerfully. "Now," he boasts, "with old JJ's business and my brains," his wife interrupts, "you'll clean up again." Gail drapes her hand over his shoulder and dangles a big yellow daisy down his chest. Now, the time has come for us to interpret this seeming nonsense. Is it all as stupid and vapid as it seems? Or is there something going on beneath the surface? Is there some noteworthy design intended to address some of the anxieties of modern life? I will assure you the answer is yes. That as stupid as that commercial seemed, it is sending very powerful messages to you, the viewer. So let's take a serious look at that trifle and discover what we find out. Okay, the first theme that characterizes that commercial is a sexless battle of the sexes. A sexless battle of the sexes. To show her mastery of her husband, remember, Gail taunts him by presenting him with a big, limp daisy. Clearly, she holds his vigor in the palm of her hand. Another key theme in the commercial is cleanliness, a concern that amounts almost to an obsession. Shield fights odors better, so you'll feel cleaner, it says again and again. Indeed, the commercial emphasizes cleanliness even more pointedly than the name of the product. The word clean is used more than the word shield. And as we all know from Psych 101, right, that whenever you focus on one thing, if you fixate on one thing, you really mean just the opposite. That is, lurking behind this commercial and its obsession with cleanliness is truly an obsession with dirtiness. But there's no dirt in the commercial. Now you'll say, oh, some soap commercials have dirt. Lava soap, remember that? You rub your hands and get all the grease off. Or ring around the collar. But most soap commercials show no dirt. So what are they talking about? Where's the dirt? What dirt are they talking about? Anyone have an idea? If it's not the dirt you have on the playground, what are they talking about? Press your button, please.
The dirt in your life, and I guess they would include sex and marriage, the state of their marriage, and anything else that that particular producer found offensive.
We will use the phrase psychological besmirchment. Okay? There's dirt like physical dirt, and then there is a different feeling of dirtiness that we have. As in most soap ads, there's no pictures of sloppy children, no sweat-soaked working men, because that's not the kind of dirt that soap solves the problems of. In this case, Gail's husband feels soiled because of what he has to do for a living in order to keep Gail in that big, nice house. Okay. My first call on J.J. Sis, the company's toughest customer, and now this. He had that high-pitched whimper, remember? A sort of feminizing trait, for he must play the female to the mighty J.J. Sis. Now, why is he called J.J. Sis? Why that name? Well, J.J. is a stereotypical nickname for a potent boss. And why the last name Sis? What's it referring to? Sissy, sister, something like that, I think. Gail's husband must do his boyish best to please J.J. Sis, just as a prostitute must satisfy a particularly demanding trick. No wonder that the man doesn't refer to his encounter with J.J. Sis as a meeting or an appointment, but as a call, right? Okay. Gail's job as an understanding wife is not to rescue her husband from his sordid obligations, but it's to help him meet them successfully. She may seem coolly self-sufficient, but she actually depends on her husband's attractiveness, just as a pimp relies on the charm of his prostitutes. And also, like a pimp, she has to keep her girl in line with occasional reminders of who is the boss. Remember, and with JJ's business and my brains, she interrupts, you'll clean up again. Notice the subtle play on words. Clearly, Gail is referring to her husband's failure to make more money. Also, her husband will have to take another shower after his meeting with J.J. Sis. Like any other tidy hooker, this man has to clean up after taking on a tough customer. Now, am I reading into this commercial, or is all this there? What do you think? Is this just some out of the ballpark reading, or are these elements in the commercial and are they there intentionally and not accidentally? What do you think? Yes.
As I understand it, the way commercials are made today, it's very unlikely anything got in there by mistake. I mean, just everything is going to be studied to death and focus grouped, and you might have read that out of their own description, the director's own description of the commercial to the advertiser.
Yeah. I think that one argument that I'm going to try to present you with is that nothing in movies is there by accident. They may not be quite as sophisticated as these commercials, where much more money is at stake for a much shorter period of time. And yet there is extremely careful planning. Every element is carefully thought through. There are very few accidents in front of us. So I don't think an interpretation like this is crazy. I think it points to what the makers actually were trying to accomplish. Gail's husband, like most white-collar workers, must debase himself to make a good impression. He must toady to his superiors. It's not his wife who has neutered him with her clippers, remember, but his way of business. Clearly, in some respects, Gail loathes her husband for the degradations that he must undergo as part of his work. She has to prepare him for his business affairs, and then she has to help him conceal his shame. So 30 seconds of ingenious advertising which we can barely stand to watch. And yet, I would suggest to you that it tells us more about the souls of women and men in the early 21st century than almost any other document you could see. Okay? It's closely cued in to our fears, our aspirations, our fantasies, and it plays it out on the screen. You don't sell soap by promising it will clean your hands. You sell soap the way you would sell it to Lady Macbeth, right? That it's going to clean your soul. Okay, let's take another example, one that everyone knows the answer to. What candy did E.T. eat in the film E.T. the Extraterrestrial? Of course, it was Reese's Pieces. And many young children could tell you that answer. It wasn't always the case that Americans understood product placement, but now we've gotten used to it. Many of us have shared the experience of feeling cheated when we go to the movies and are treated to 5 minutes of commercial advertisements on the screen. We may disagree about the difference between the movies and television, but the most obvious difference at least used to be that there were no commercials at the movies, except now there are. The line is narrowing. 20th Century Fox was the first studio to offer manufacturers a specific display of their name brand products in return to cash. At the time, it was between $10,000 just for an item to appear on screen, up to $40,000 for a character to actually interact with the product. But now the prices are much, much steeper, and it's all because of E.T. and Reese's Pieces. The president of Fox Licensing said, quote, "I envision a dozen more such arrangements in areas like soft drinks, foodstuffs, transportation, hotels, bicycles, and houseware." He had it. He underestimated clearly what was to happen. Until the mid-1970s, placing real soft drinks, cereals, TV sets, shaving cream, and other products on the screen was simply haphazard. They would just go to a store and buy some things and put it on the set. No one thought of selling excess. Yes?
Well, it was more than that. It was a fear of trademark infringement, that they would actually get sued for using a real product on the screen such that they made stuff up. And it's an interesting twist that now companies pay to have their, rather than Walt Disney, who sues over everything, for
Very much
instance.
so. Very much so. A very good point. Have some milk duds, Marlon Brando said to George C. Scott in The Formula, offering a distinctive yellow box. Milk duds didn't even have to pay for that. But times have shifted. Scarcely an item appears on the screen that hasn't been paid for, and of course the companies say that it's all for their benefit of the studios. That is, they will provide products and guarantee that there will be no copyright infringements. As one put it, we gave Fox authentic signs, canned goods, and cereal boxes from the 1960s. It would have taken Fox a month to get all the clearances. The high visibility of product placements, as I said, is all a product of the success of E.T. and Reese's Pieces. Within weeks, sales of Reese's Pieces went up 65%. But even more important, for the first time, Reese's Pieces began to be sold in movie theater concession stands, which are very, very difficult to break into. It shows that product placement works. Just ask James Bond, right? Reese's Pieces didn't even have to pay for use in E.T. What it did is it made exchanges. It promoted the film in its advertising. It gave away T-shirts and movie posters. And of course now tie-ins are a basic way that movies are financed. Now, of course, movie makers deny that selling space in movies to advertise products will influence films. As one MGM executive put it, "We'll pursue products if it makes sense without compromising the integrity of the film. We are a creative medium, not an advertising medium." And you can be sure, whenever Hollywood talks about integrity, that you should be holding onto your wallet tightly. So let's turn now to how to read a film. How to read a film. If you go up to the PN 1995 section of the library, you will see a vast body of theory about how to read a film. That is, what steps you take to interpret a film. And if you go up there, at the risk of gross oversimplification, you will see books that fall into one of four categories. Okay. The first category we'll call auteurism, A-U-T-E-R-I-S-M. And that is simply the notion that a movie has an author, this is the French word for author, just as a novel has an author. Now that author might be the director, or it might be the producer, it might be a leading actor or actress, or a screenwriter, but the assumption is that there is one dominant presence who created the movie. The second category of interpretation is called genre study. What's a genre? Push the button, please.
It's like a collection of stories.
Okay,
Like-
a genre is a particular type of film. Okay, so horror films are a genre. Mystery films are a genre. War films are a genre. Every genre has a set of aesthetic and narrative conventions. All war films look pretty much alike. All horror films vary within them, but they share certain conventions. Okay. This genre analysis is also called formalism. The third category is called structuralism. It draws upon anthropological theory, linguistic theory, literary theory, semiotics, and communications theories to interpret films. And the fourth category is called materialism. It seeks to understand the ways that films reflect the economic interests of their creators. To give you an example, there was an article on the film Flying Down to Rio. One critic interpreted this film as resulting from RCA's desire to promote Pan Am's air routes to South America. Doesn't seem like a very compelling interpretation to me. But we're going to use none of those schools of interpretation. We're going to use a very different form of interpretation in our course that's quite distinct from the four categories we have just talked about. We are going to pursue an historical approach, an approach that views films as psychological and cultural documents, an approach that stresses Hollywood's role in creating and disseminating certain ideologies. That is my idea that I broached to you before of Hollywood as tutor and teacher. Okay. Now, what do I mean by this? When I say that movies are psychological texts, I mean that they speak to individual and social anxieties and tensions. And if we look closely at a film, we can begin to uncover what those psychological tensions are. Okay, just like a psychoanalyst, we're going to peel away skin of the onion till we get to the core. When I say that movies are cultural texts, I mean that movies present particular images of gender, ethnicity, class, sexuality, evil, and violence. Our job as, quote-unquote, cultural critics is to look closely at a film and to try to uncover what those underlying, deeply rooted cultural assumptions are. Now, what do I mean by ideology? I do not mean a specific, coherent set of political ideas, as when we say communist ideology, or liberal ideology, or conservative ideology. What I mean is something more general than that. By ideology, I mean our common sense view of reality. What do I mean by that? I mean it's the way we look at the world and the basic assumptions we make about how people act, what sex roles are, what ethnic groups there are, how social class functions. Ideology, in this sense, refers to a certain set of ideas, images, and myths that shape the way we perceive the world. Ideology is our structure of perception. Many of us wear glasses, and they shape how we see the world. Well, Hollywood puts ideological lenses in front of our eyes, and these don't give us 20/20 vision. Rather, they're filled with distortions, they're filled with exclusions, and our job as cultural critics is to uncover those.